Welcome to the HR Uprising podcast. This podcast series explores HR hot topics and challenges through conversations with relevant experts and real-life HR, learning, and OD professionals. The HR Uprising is about learning through collaboration and evidence-based action. We want colleagues to have the confidence and skills to rise up through their organizations by delivering real, lasting business value. Now, introducing your host, chartered psychologist, experienced change agent, entrepreneur, speaker, and coach, Lucinda.
Hello and welcome to this week's HR Uprising podcast. And this is the second in our series of real HR professionals. The first one with Paula Jones a couple of weeks ago went down so brilliantly. And I'm sure that you'll find this one with Daniel Bailey brilliant as well. But before I go on there, we've got a couple of weeks left of August in order for you to take advantage of the early bird booking rate, which is 50% off our normal fee for the brand new Change Superhero virtual training course. You may have heard me talking about the face-to-face one, which was kicked off in April. Clearly now we've morphed it into a virtual one. And actually, I think it's going to be even better this way because it's going to allow us to work with a cohort of people over a succession of modules. So there'll be 2 to 3 hour modules. Obviously, you get a copy of the book and also you get 360 feedback. I'll be running it personally. So as I'm sure you'd agree, change is here to stay in our organisations, possibly a different level of change as we work out how to deal with a sort of hybrid workforce. So if you'd like to polish up your change management skills, work with a bunch of like-minded individuals, then why don't you consider joining us on this virtual virtual change superhero training course. I'll put the links on the website as ever, so you can go to hruprising.com if you want to find the links really easily. They'll be in the show notes and they're on the website. So hope to see some of you there. There's a handful of courses and I'm really looking forward to running it. In the meantime, listening to this week's Real HR episode. Hello and welcome to the second in our Real HR series. My name's Lucinda and you're listening to the HR Uprising podcast. So this week, I'm delighted to have another member of our HR Uprising LinkedIn community, Daniel Bailey, to join us. You're joining me from Bristol on a very hot day, aren't we? We're both commenting on how warm it is.
Yes, thanks for having me, Lucinda. It's a great opportunity to come and share experiences from the wider HR community.
Yeah, it's really lovely to have to start with this particular topic. Quite a few people were really, really complimentary about it because, as we were saying earlier, often it's nice to hear real stories. There's lots of thought leaders out there, but actually everybody's got a story to share, and ourselves included. And I think often it's really nice and more accessible to hear from people that we consider to be more like our peers, and that's the purpose of this series. And I suppose with that in mind, Daniel, do you want to give us a little bit of an introduction to who you are, maybe as a person first, and then we'll go on to your career?
Yes, so person first. So I'm I've got a daughter who is 6. So relatively new dad, not an expert, although I don't think anyone becomes an expert at being a parent. But walked in the general sphere of HR probably since 2006, I think. Started off like most people, at the admin section. I actually fell into HR because I started off doing technical support for a broadband company to start off with, which was very, very bizarre. And then a role came up in HR, and I thought, well, that's something different. Working with people, the job was closer to where I lived, and applied for it and got it. And then got a bit more interest.
Purely opportunist, was it?
Yes.
You didn't know that you wanted to be in people, or was it that you were more peoply and you were in a sort of more techie support role? Was there something you weren't keen on that made you decide to look for it?
Yeah, I mean, again, it was also, there was a convenience factor. It was my first employer was Clark's, and I lived in where Clark's is based at the time, so there was a bit of a convenience factor in there. But I was genuinely interested in people in HR. I did some components of it when I was at college. And, the things around, particularly around, I think, disciplinary and grievance, I actually found quite interesting. I don't know if that's a bit of a being nosy or trying to resolve people's problems. I think you can probably find it's a little bit of a mixture of the two, to be honest with you. I mean, you talk to HR people sharing employee relations stories, but opportunity came up with them. Went for it, and I got it, and then started off, doing, it's traditional HR tasks like CVs and writing application letters. And then it gradually kind of got exposed to more other activities like helping out with employee relations issues. So we used to have an employee relations hotline where store managers would ring up and ask questions and for support, and we would give them responses. Would help them and advise them on how to potentially resolve the issues they had. And then a bit later, a role in reward came up, and being a bit of a geek with character, as a previous recruiter has once referred to me, and the label's kind of stuck.
Geek with character, okay.
Yeah.
Compliment. Yeah. That's kind of a compliment.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the term of geek or nerd, I think, is a term of endearment nowadays. So I kind of just accept it now. So, but yeah, so the role in reward came up, and I thought, I was always interested in how companies determine how people are paid, because it's such a sensitive issue, and creates lots of emotions and everything else. Went for it and got it, and that was kind of my first foray into reward, really. And then, so
you've stayed in reward, haven't you? You've done a number of roles within reward. That's your specialism, would you say, now?
Yes, it is. Yeah, I stayed in reward for them for a while, and then I met my wife in Bristol. I was living in the street at the time, so I relocated to Bristol. Unfortunately, that was during the financial crash, so HR roles were a bit like were hard to come by during that time. And then eventually, I found a role, of all places, working for a trade union, being a full-time official, which is, which was working for the British Medical Association, and that was being a full-time official, so helping doctors and dentists, members of the union, with their employment related issues.
So was that an HR job, or was that a trade union?
It was working for the trade union as a full-time official. So I would go with members to meetings with their employers and represent them. So working on, depending on who you talk to, I was either working on the light side or the dark side, to kind of
yes, it does depend.
Star Wars terminology there.
Yes.
But I mean, I did that for 3 years, and I mean the learning curve was very high, because the realm of doctors in the NHS is I mean, their terms and conditions, is an absolute mammoth and beast in all their policies and things. But the learning curve was high. But just the experience of, again, just positioning yourself reminding yourself that there is an element of the other side of the table. So when you are, coming up with HR solutions and things, you do have to consider both sides equally. And interestingly, when I did my Myers-Briggs profile a few years ago, on the T and the F, I am slightly more T than F. So because ultimately, a business is a business and does have to, survive and be in profit and all that kind of stuff. But you still have to consider the human component. So I like to think that my time in the union does give me that self-reflection. And I can imagine, if I'm coming up with like a reward solution, I can visualize myself sat across the other side of the table and thinking, okay, so what would he be trying to pull apart in my argument? Or what is he not being transparent about? What's he hiding? Because ultimately, I used to, my opening discussion with a lot of employers was, I'm here to obviously protect, I'm here to represent the member, but that means that I'm making sure that you're doing your job properly. You're following your own policies and processes that you set in place.
About holding them accountable, isn't it? It's about being ethical and showing integrity.
Yeah. And interestingly, working for the union, I was actually a union rep within the union itself. I was a GMB representative who was a union for the BMA employees, which again was interesting. It was almost union experience on top of union experience. So
I've got a perception that you can challenge me here about that in terms of those sort of well, I mean, it's perception where people do say that unions, that maybe it's the dark side, is that sometimes it's about being very dogmatic. Is that a very old-fashioned way of being in the union, or
it is, yeah. And I mean, there are certainly, and I've met other people in other unions, and they fit the stereotypical image of, people that are potentially there just to be obstructive. For me,
yeah, that's the perception, isn't it? For some,
yeah. And what, again, I think a lot of people forget is the unions are there to represent their members, and a lot of the time, there will be, some unions that are out to get everything they can get, but a lot of the time they want to see, fair play. And if you're trying to purposely hide something from them, then why are you doing that? And pay transparency is a big thing for me, is that if you cannot explain to them how you've come to a reward decision on pay or whatever, then they're quite rightly going to go, well, how have you come to that? Why can't you tell me that? Why do you need to keep it a secret? And then it goes back to those, age old examples of HR going into a darkened room and making decisions on things,
which makes people really cynical and makes the whole thing demotivational, doesn't it? When especially in reward, when ideally that would be something that is a benefit or it's motivational.
And it was very eye-opening. But a lot of my colleagues who I work with took the same approach as me. A lot of them had come from HR roles or had previously been solicitors or barristers, or had other legal backgrounds, but the general approach is we are there to represent the members' interests, to make sure that you're doing what you should be doing and not doing things that are, untoward. So
it's actually about being a neutral kind of advocate. So I guess you wouldn't. You would maybe say that was a good role for you. What made you leave that then?
What made me leave? I suppose at the time it was a solely home-based role, so I was working from home every day, and what I like about HR, again, back to my Myers-Briggs profile, I'm very heavily in E, so I get a lot of my energy from sometimes just being around people, being able to bounce ideas off of each other, etc. And particularly in current times, it's very difficult to have natural conversations where that kind of problem solving / sharing of issues,
the informal stuff that gets you thinking and creating new ideas.
Yes,
it's tricky,
absolutely.
Isn't it? Yeah. Have you found any way of managing to do that in the current circumstances?
Not really, to be honest with you. No. Again, working part-time and trying to handle a lot of meetings and things going on, it is a challenge. I try not to overburden my wife with it, because it's the last thing she wants to hear about is HR stuff after work, and me going into work mode sometimes, as we put it. But I think what I've tried to do recently is I've tried to go into the office at least once a week to kind of get that kind of, I know there aren't people there necessarily, but it just allows me to kind of have that kind of, it's not at home, I'm I'm at the office, and you do have to pick up the phone more, which again does take time, but it's not the same as when what they call
bump into them at the coffee machine.
Machine water cooler moment happens naturally. So I think that's something that's really been lost during COVID. There's a lot of, there potentially has been time saved, but there's probably been an equal amount of time wasted because of those natural solutions that would have happened if you were in an office haven't been allowed to happen. So that was the reason why I left, just to come back to your original question.
Because you wanted to be with people, basically.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
So then you went back in Comp and Bend. So again, you went more. So and you've been in. I'm just looking at LinkedIn here. In terms of you've kind of, that pattern's continued then, hasn't it? Since
it has.
2012.
Yeah, and I've continued to kind of try and grow and move from company to company to do different things, gradually kind of get exposure to different things, payroll, HR systems, a variety of things, and kind of, because this is where my heart lies, is in this activity, in the area of of reward, is kind of where I still feel that we do have a great deal of kind of leaps and bounds to make still. And that's kind of
So you still see us. So what if you were to? So someone listening to this perhaps hasn't got they're generalist, or they don't really understand what a specialist reward manager does. How would you describe it? I mean, has it been broadly the same job in all the different places? Because actually, for the benefits of listeners, you've been in public sector, you've been in higher education, you've been in private sector, you've been in financial services and business. So you've been, and prior to that, although I'm not sure if it was reward, you're in the NHS as well. So how would you define the day job, if you like, or the expectations?
Yeah, I mean, I found in a lot of the companies where I've often been in a lone wolf role, because most companies I've worked for haven't had obviously the luxury of having a large reward team to work in. So normally I've been a subject matter expert, and in reward, but I'm the only person undertaking that activity. So sometimes it can be a bit of a not a lonely existence, but you might know what you're talking about for pay benchmarking and job evaluation, all that kind of stuff, but you've kind of got to bring other people who maybe aren't so clued up on it along along with you. So that's one of the challenges. I also have found, interestingly, there's been a positive correlation between working in reward and also being the go-to person in your department, of being the geek with dealing with spreadsheet queries. And if I had £1 for every time, can I have a help with a VLOOKUP statement or something like that? That seems to be a staple.
It's really funny you say that, because I'm thinking back to someone that I worked with really closely who's in reward, and I've got to say she was one of the best people I've ever met on a spreadsheet as well. It's got to be like a key competence if you're going to go down this specialism.
Yeah, it's you can't be afraid of data's data. At the end of the day, I've met a lot of people in reward who have differing skill sets. I mean, if you speak to some of my colleagues, both past and present, they'll tell you that a development area of mine is the ability to kind of plan lots of things out into great detail. Because often, again, being the lone wolf, I've often just had to kind of react and do a lot of things in the now because they need to be done. And, it might be, for example, that, finance need a headcount report in a certain way, but your HR systems and payroll systems will not produce it in that way. So you often have to make and create solutions in between, to take all the data and transform it and give it across. And, I would say potentially that's not traditionally what a reward person is in the kind of typical job description of a reward person. That's not kind of...
then you'll end up being quite transactional again, I guess. Yes. So it goes back to, if you've got the right data or analytics, then you can be more effective, as is the case with lots of roles, I suppose.
Yes, exactly. And and yes, I do enjoy that, but that's not mainly what the reward the reward person is there to do. And also the other challenging thing can be, and I said this in the page on the CIPD website, is you have to be able to distance yourself from solutions. So you could be working with your colleagues and you could be having quite sensitive discussions relating to pay review, bonus discussions, share awards, LTIPs, all that kind of stuff that are really high level sensitive conversations. And you have to there are times when you can talk about it and times when you can't, and you're also going to see everybody, what they're paid and everything. And if you look at salaries and you look at someone who's sat next to you and you're in reward and you start having you feel particularly emotive about it for the wrong reasons, subjective reasons I should say, then potentially reward isn't for you. You kind of have to be able to look at stuff and almost take yourself out of the equation. And and that is, some people can do it,
so the ability to distance yourself, be quite logical and factual and objective is I mean, I think you could argue that that's important in HR to different degrees anyway, I suppose, in terms of other people's performance and other things like that. But I can see that it's particularly sensitive in this kind of role.
You have to be, even it's almost, you have to do it at the organization level, because I've worked with people that have maybe been HR representatives for different parts of the business, and they'll support like sales, marketing, IT, etc. And sometimes, you can perceive a little bit of an element of Stockholm syndrome where they're ingrained into their customer areas and they're doing the best for their customers. But then, in reward, you have to take it a step back and, they might say, oh, how am I meant to recruit someone for that salary? And then, you would say, well, have you tried recruiting for them yet? You can't just have an arbitrary statement of, that salary's, not enough, especially when, you've gone away, benchmarked it against, survey data and all these, quantifiable sources. And,
yes,
it's, as we say, that job evaluation is not, it's not scientific, it's systematic. It's not a put value into column A, you get an absolute value in column B. It's our educated, look at the data, which is better than just simply going, well, I think they should be paid this.
Yeah. So would you ever find yourself interacting with recruitment specialists then,
yes,
for that purpose?
Yes, yeah. I've done that historically. So I've, been asked to, like benchmark a role or give us what we feel are good, even if it's for internal recruitment, for example, they might want a suggestion if they're promoting someone from role A to role B, what kind of increase should we give them, and how I've seen the role historically is that it's been a center of excellence. So I will give you the value and the range depending on what the organization's pay policies are. And then, if you do anything, outside of that, because sometimes the pay range is a guideline and not an absolute minimum maximum in some organizations, that the manager or the recruiting manager or whoever, or recruitment person, needs to justify why they have gone outside of that.
Yeah.
And then you might be asked to provide a contrapoint is to say, I don't, the range is accurate. The data, was refreshed, in July. It's relative of 1,000 respondents. So statistically, it ticks all the right boxes. But ultimately, I do understand, and I think reward people need to understand. Sometimes businesses do have to make a commercial decision that doesn't necessarily match with all the benchmarking, site, the work that you may have undertaken. I've been in an organization before where you've done all the, the bonus and pay benchmarking, and then, the CA might talk to you and just say, right, I just want to give 1% to everybody.
Yeah.
In all that work you've done.
So what's the point? Yeah.
You just have to go, yeah, well, that's a commercial decision the business has made. I've still done my due diligence as a center of excellence to provide the business with the market, statistical and economic data it needs to make certain decisions. But ultimately, not here to make the decision. It's like a advisor, advisor / expert role.
Absolutely. You provide the information, but you can't make the decision for them.
Yeah, I think it's Ulrich's model. You'll have to forgive my knowledge on some of these things, but I think that's the Ulrich model of how. So that's traditionally how I've kind of operated in the reward sphere. So,
what I'm hearing is that it's quite. You might be doing things like job evaluation. You might be doing quite a lot of benchmarking. You've got to be tech savvy, numbers savvy, and highly logical and objective in terms of things, in terms of the role, the sort of skills that you've come across. Do you ever find yourself getting involved in, say, setting reward strategy, or actually driving, say, putting in a performance-related pay or taking one out or anything like that?
So yeah, I've then again in a number of my roles had to suggest to the business what I think, or some multiple proposals, for example, what the pay review should be, even making changes to bonus schemes, and setting what we should be paying people, because I use pay benchmarking as an example. You can pay benchmark a role. You can do it via a range, or you can do it at a more broader level, and each one has its pros. Each one has its pros and cons. And then could have a commercial impact on the other. Say for example, if you benchmark at a role level, and then you suddenly find that there's been a significant shift in the salary data, you could find someone who's maybe that was happily within their pay range suddenly now appears to be massively overpaid. So what do you do in those scenarios at the pay review? Do you give them nothing and potentially upset some high performers who potentially appear to be over the range or over market? or do you give them the cash equivalent, so they are getting something, but they're not getting an increase to their base. So yeah, you kind of
sort of solutions.
Yeah.
Do you have oh, sorry, go on, Karen.
I was just going to say that, and again, in another role, very much had to, where the workforce was heavily unionized, you would have to propose, adjustments where, if there was a shift change that, they're in their terms and conditions stipulated that they got a position and an amount of their previous shift pattern, how you would pitch that as an idea to make sure it was fair, equitable, the methodology you've used is transparent, and you've used, reference values. You haven't just gone off, oh yeah, I've put a 1 there just because I feel it's a 1.
Yeah,
I've put
your
a
experience
1.
having been in the on the dark side, but it must be quite handy though there as well. So you've got what's required.
Exactly. I can say to them,
I've been in your shoes.
Yeah, I did laugh once when I sat across the table from a union person, and they were proposing a pay increase based on a survey data sample of 1. And it's a bit like on the TV when you see adverts and they say based on a sample of 63 people, when you think, well, how is that representative of 65 or 70 million people in the country? So it's you've got to be honest about where it's coming from and have that, if I'm saying it's 2%, I can say, well, I've picked that because the Department of National Statistics has given me this, or the Economic Institute has given me this, or the Institute of Physical Studies has given me this, and you're trying to collate all of that data together to come to a reasonable or, a reasonably objective based decision using some factual data, not just going, I think we should just pay 1% pay increase this year because, hey, 1%. But also it's challenging it back to the business. So, I've been asked before about to challenge, the spend on a 1% increase. So of course, not only do you have to consider the pay increase, you have to consider the increase to pension, the increase to NI, everything else that kind of, is a kind of.
So again, having that eye on the bigger picture, always.
Absolutely,
you've got to be able to operating in the best interest of the business again. In terms
exactly.
Of
so not getting to the end of the year and trying to do the bonus payment to find out suddenly you haven't accrued for 13.8%, the employer's national insurance. I've read some horror stories about that. It's you kind of need to have peered with your finance peers to make sure you're all talking the same language. And that can be a challenge because the world of accounting and the world of HR are mutually exclusive. They kind of don't tend to want to.
But again, you must overlap more than many in your role, I'd have thought, to be able to have that sort of link. You can see that linking into budgeting.
And you have to, that's commerciality of improving your commercial your commercial reputation with the business. As if you say, you've already sat down with the financial planning manager or the payroll manager or whoever, and they've got all that buy-in already and they've put their feedback in, then you've done half of the work for them because you've brought everyone else along the journey that you need, to get a rubber stamp from the CEO or, for them to go away and consider it with shareholders or whoever it may be.
Absolutely. And so I'll ask this one quickly because I want to make sure we've got time to go on to what you want to do next and things like that. But I'm just curious because of the things like performance-related pay or bonuses, which is better. Have you got a view, because you've been in a number of businesses, is it about horses for courses in the organisations that you've been in, or do you think that the world is moving towards one thing or another thing? Have you got an opinion?
Yeah, I do. I mean, essentially, I think a lot of organisations need to kind of even shelve that idea to start off with and even go right back to the fundamentals of pay transparency. Most organizations, you still see horror stories of organizations who are still not communicating even how they benchmark salaries and, how they determine pay as fair and equitable in the first place. I use the example of, you could be a rocket scientist driving a bus, but, you're not necessarily going to pay. And
rocket scientist rates.
Yeah, because they're driving the bus, and the market, whether we like it or not, the market will always dictate the value of a role, but not necessarily the value of the person and knowledge, skills, of experience that they bring along. And I still think we in Reward have a lot to do in that sphere to kind of be open about that. I mean, I talk to people about it till I'm blue in the face, in that we all can go, well, I think I'm worth this in the market, and I think I'm worth this, and that's great if you have a objective view of what you're worth, but you need to have an objective view of what the market, is
what
going
the market
to
wants to pay.
And I think we need to do that before we
First.
start. Yeah, because I see all this lovely other stuff about the what was it? The hygiene in the, is it motivation? I forget, in the Hertzberg.
Hygiene factors is salary stuff.
Yeah. So I think there's some hygiene.
Well, they say the salaries
stuff.
only increase you for it's the sort of thing. That hygiene factors where we're only motivated for a short period of time, which is a pay rise. Whereas actually, the way in which we're managed and the behaviours that our managers demonstrate are much more long-term motivational. But we moan more about the hygiene factors.
Yeah, we do, and those are what's create the most amount of noise. You give someone a pay increase today, and they've forgotten about it tomorrow. But actually, if I can reiterate to you every year that, person X, we do benchmark your role, annually using the market data that's collected from employers of similar sizes and what they pay and, at the base rate and all this kind of stuff.
How do you manage to get that data? Is there an easy way for people out there listening thinking I need to benchmark? How would you recommend someone goes about doing that?
I mean, I've seen a couple of videos on YouTube, and I think this is where some of the sphere of particularly HR in the UK is lacking. I mean, YouTube's a fantastic source of information. I think some of the bigger survey providers like Towers Watson and Hay have put on there, like, for example, how they would do, or how they use their pay benchmarking methodology. But there's much, obviously those are big ticket survey houses that have existed for a long time, particularly Hay, I think, who is considered the grandfather of, job evaluation systems. But there's other ones out there like Salary and Expert HR. And again, full disclosure, I'm not paid by any of these companies to dictate them. I'm just reiterating.
That's where you get the data. So the data's out there if they want to get it. Do you have to pay for that data, or is
you do? Yeah. I mean, like a lot of things, if you want the qualitative data and you want the reassurance that the data methodology of collecting the data that has been audited, because when we do a pay benchmarking exercise and salary survey, you don't send the data off and that's it. The survey house or company will look at what you've provided to look for any potential errors. So you want that reassurance that you're paying for a quality product. There's nothing wrong with free sources, but you can draw questions about whether or not they are, fully accurate. So, I mean, I would say to anybody,
get
if you
quality
did have
data and pay for it, budget for it,
and that's the rationale to your, CEO, but even before you go with that, you need to go back and take a step back, like you said earlier, about your pay strategy, about where are you looking to get the data from? Do you need it from a dedicated IT salary survey source because you're more of an IT business, or actually if you're more of a business that's got lots of different roles in sales, marketing, etc., you might want a more of a broader scope. Do you need a global scope? Is it just the UK? There's lots of factors you can go into, and they range from being quite the price is the price at the end of the day, and you have to remember that whatever you do, you should look to repeat at least in some sort of pre-agreed cycle of 3 to 5 years, so that you can do pay benchmarking consistently when you're doing your reward strategy of pay increases on an annual basis. Because otherwise what you found is you may have benchmarked one way one year with one salary survey source, and then the next year you've done it a completely different way, and you're then going to have to re-justify why you've used a different methodology for your pay benchmarking. So
it's very much about fairness. Again, your sort of whole principle here is about fairness and transparency. You start with benchmarking, and then in your experience, if you were to look at the different approaches that people might look for reward, whether it is incremental pay, it's performance related pay, it's bonuses, I don't know what else, is there something else out there? Have you got a broad opinion on which are the most effective, or which would you steer away from at all costs nowadays?
I mean, performance-related pay it can be great, but it's underpinned by your performance methodology. Again, I've seen lots of examples, particularly in some employment tribunal cases where the discretion of performance-related pay / bonuses is put at the manager level, and without oversight, I think I'll use that term, or guidance perhaps is a better term, from people looking
at things like calibration or moderation.
Correct, exactly. You do have to look at have you even just when you're making a decision, and you've have you steered towards giving your women more or your men more, and is that just happened by accident, or have you done that? The HR should challenge back and go, well, you've got 6 people on the same role there, and actually you've given the men more than the women. Why have you done that? Do you even know that you've done that? And so for me, it's performance related pay can be great, and performance related bonuses can be great, provided the significant level of oversight is there to make sure that the transparency is there, that they are awarded differently for the right reasons on merit and genuine performance, rather than I know my manager, I go bowling with him to the pub or whatever,
or I'm sad he's going to they're going to leave if I don't give them. It's actually got to be something
exactly
quite...
and you hear that from time and time again of, if I don't give person X this, they're going to leave. I developed a little bit of a curve which basically tried to plot someone's statistical likelihood of leaving. I think a lot of companies are doing this with AI nowadays, but this was a few years ago, where if you took into a factor of how people are close to the office and proximity, commuting distance, where they are in their pay range, how long they've been in the company, how long they've been in their current position. If you take all those factors into, for someone genuinely to move to another company, given if they've been there for like 10 years, genuinely that's going to, they have become a bit, intertwined into that. So for them to up and leave statistically could be less, in terms of
than the fear of the manager. It's maybe about the manager's fear, but it still isn't the right reason either.
No,
if you're talking about transparency and fairness,
no.
is it?
No.
So, I mean, I think it's interesting because we talked earlier about what your plans are next, and one of the things you mentioned in passing, didn't you, that you work part-time because actually you also are sort of primary carer, or your wife is primary breadwinner, isn't she? So you
yes,
look after your little one, so very forward thinking in that respect. And what I was going to ask is, we were talking about what you might want to do next, and you're almost leading on to that. I can hear you've got a passion about it. Do you want to talk about where you think it's going and what you want to learn more about?
I would like to do, again, probably revealing some of my ideas for someone to swoop in and steal away, but again, happy to collaborate with people on ideas. Again, I often comment on the LinkedIn forums on various things, because I think that's ultimately what we're all about, is that the HR book isn't set in stone. It's one that's you can go to university and study it for 3 years, but actually when you get out into the big wide world, you might not find the exact example in the textbook that exists out there. So collaboration,
and it's all context specific as well,
exactly,
isn't it?
Yes. And what works in one organization won't work in another, and that's acquired by wisdom and obviously the application of your knowledge. So for me, it's where I'd like to go now is I'd like to start kind of expanding out and discussing some of these things more in the kind of new tech sphere. I think maybe consider starting a YouTube channel to discuss some of these points to, again, give them greater exposure. I mean, I see lots of articles. That's why I think with your podcast, fantastic idea. It's new media. You give me an article on a website with, and it's pages and pages of text, and it's an instant kind of, I've lost interest for me, because that's not my learning style. I will learn and I will absorb based on, what I read and watch. What I watch and listen to, beg your pardon.
Yes. And to be able to do it when you want to as well, isn't it? Availability of things too.
Exactly. And I've watched some webinars on particular activities and, job evaluation, benchmarking. Hay did a really good one on, looking at, the underlying behind the gender pay gap and stuff. And I find that much more informative. Mm-hmm. I'd like to do a bit more on that. But the other area I'd really like to touch in upon is, again, for being the reward person in geek, if you like, the lone wolf doing the techie, you're often asked to produce stats on labour turnover and recruitment costs, and such the like. And the labour turnover comes with so what? What are you looking to? Most people will pedal around 18 and 16%, but what does that really mean? We're still, I think, in statistics for HR, still locked in this older way of doing it, and we need to look to the future of being much more better with all this data that we sit on, and how we can kind of best present that in a way that HR people can understand. And I like to think I've got
analytical skills are coming to the fore, aren't they? I mean, I think that's some of the things that I was involved in a CIPD assessment yesterday, and that's one of the new ones, isn't it, that's been brought through, and that's very much come through from what you're saying and the way in which, if we're going to use AI or tech and bring value, that aspect is important to have in the profession.
And we can't continue to do the things the way that we've done them. There's a example going on in the video game sphere at the moment where some people have not been happy with what the CEO's being paid, and this is all public knowledge and in the sphere at the moment, and they've been sharing a spreadsheet to collect all their pay. So you would argue there that their pay transparency approach, if they have even a pay strategy for pay transparency, a pay benchmarking, hasn't worked particularly well there. So it's
not
kind
sure
of
about their confidentiality either.
Yes, exactly. Well, now the spreadsheet's become public. So I read in a story recently.
Awkward.
Yeah. That's a realm of my personal interest, video games, and my subjective reward is now entered into that sphere. So I think for me, there's a piece around I'd like to kind of expand on how I can maybe help other maybe smaller employers, perhaps maybe small to mid-size, even larger ones, with bringing my kind of approach to it, which is kind of ultimate, I say ultimate transparency, but ultimate transparency around your methodology.
Yes.
I'm not a real proponent in the whole, I think I should be able to see your salary and you should be able to see my salary. Yet I don't think the emotional intelligence is there behind how we make salary decisions is widely understood. I think we need to achieve that first before you can move to, you can see my salary and I can see yours. So we don't make my job's the same as yours, and that's based on just an assumption rather than we've benchmarked it and job evaluated it and all that kind of stuff.
Sort of full circle there, isn't it? Back to the practicalities and the logic and objectivity.
Yes.
And I suppose in terms of wrapping this up appropriately, I know you said you were happy for people to link. So listeners who are already on the HR Uprising group, then Daniel's in there anyway, so link in with him, you'll be able to easily find him there, but we'll put your LinkedIn details on the show notes. So there might be people who might want to reach out to you informally to have a chat, and you never know if you end up doing more independently in the future, or if you're in a full-time, part-time employment at the moment, but you are employed at the moment, but there's nothing to stop us from collaborating from whatever position we're in.
Absolutely. More than happy for anybody to reach out and and chat. Obviously availability speaking. Yes, not doing the school. Well, there is no school run at the moment, but
it's not long before there will be.
Yes, it will be.
We're always there. In fact, by the time this goes out, we'll be right on the window of that.
That's it. Yeah, back to school. But yeah, again, for me, HR is all about that collaboration of ideas. Whether some of them are, good or bad or whatever, is that, we are ultimately here to all achieve the same thing. So yeah, more than happy people to reach out if they want to read a bit more. The CIPD have got, I'm on there as a day in the life of a reward analyst.
Oh, great. Well, can we put the link?
You can put the link in there. Yeah, again, that's publicly visible. Again, more than happy for anybody to reach out, collaborate, chat, discuss anything reward related, or as some people have asked me about, what would a union do in this example of, can I put my union hat on for 5 minutes? I've had a few of those before.
Sounds like there's plenty you can offer there.
Yeah.
Daniel, thank you so much for coming on the HR Uprising. I've learned a lot about a role that I've worked with people in this domain for some time, but I now understand a lot more about what the job would be. And obviously, if there's someone listening out there, they'll be either going, that sounds perfect for me, or that doesn't. So I think that's incredibly helpful. Really appreciate your time.
Appreciate you having me on. I really enjoyed it. It's nice to share it wider with the wider audience. So I look forward to hearing more stories as they come on. So
yes, we're definitely going to carry on the series. It's really nice to get those stories going. Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising podcast. You can access more information, including resources or links mentioned in the show, at our website, www.hruprising.com. Also, you might want to join our LinkedIn community or tweet to us at HR Uprising. We'd love to hear from you.